I listen to K-pop, and it's kind of funny how K-pop seems to be going through its 90s era. The US has already gone through its 90s era music and fashion. Because I know what ours was like, I can recognize in other cultures when they go through theirs, especially when you listen to a lot of it. Like BTS, EXO, Red Velvet, EXID, EXID, that one. You can hear in a lot of their songs start out sounding very, very modern, with like they're laying down some sort of raps and some sort of hip-hop and some sort of funkiness that I'm all for. After the initial part, they'll shift into a sort of melodic 90s R&B type of sound. And they'll sort of stay in that for a little bit. A lot of the times they will then shift into something sounding very 80s, like some sort of popular 80s song, and then it'll shift again, go into 70s sounding almost, and then it'll make a complete 180, turn back on its head, and come right back to sounding like it's from the 90s again. And I just think this is interesting. They're sort of taking a bunch of their flavors that they've accumulated and they put them all together, and it sounds like it's a song from a bunch of different time periods, but not like it's forced. But you can sort of examine the trail of which time periods they're borrowing from to make it sound the way it does. So like with EXID's Triple D. Sounds kind of modern, but it also sounds kind of 90s. Modern. '80s to '70s with the very 90s right there. 90s, early 2000s. Back to 90s, right? You get what I'm saying? So they're kind of one of the reasons that I got into K-pop is because a lot of the songs do sound like they're from the 90s, and I like a lot of older music. So when I first heard it, and then I started hearing the sort of influences from 90s, 80s, 70s, and early 2000s music, is like, this is very familiar, it seems very nostalgic, which I kind of wonder if that's not why a lot of people like it, is because it's got that sort of flavor a lot of the time that almost brings back nostalgia, but in a new way. Alright, and now Ice Cream Cake. I personally like this song very much. Current jam. 90s, early 2000s, right? Like, if you didn't know any better, you would think this was a song from the 90s. So Ice Cream Cake sounds like it came straight out of the 90s. It's like dated in a cute way, and not like, oh, it's cute kind of thing. It sort of feels like it's almost marketed that way, which I wouldn't doubt that it is. The agencies that run these people's lives, and I'm sure a lot of their influences as well, of music they've listened to up to this point. A lot of music that makes its way over to Korea, I'm gonna guess, because Korea is so secluded from other cultures that by the time the 90s music got there, it was new, almost. And by the time they were ready to do their own K-pop thing, that was what sort of everybody was familiar with, that sort of sound. It's as if because they were quote-unquote backdated, that they're making more 90s music. Now, for one, that's very interesting, and two, you're making more 90s music, and that's fantastic. It's also funny how a lot of K-pop band names include letters that they don't have letters for, or like they're words that they don't have letters for, like EXO. There's no X in Hangul, like just like there's no F or V, so for all of those they kind of have to substitute B and P. And so it's just kind of funny how they chose those names on purpose, but they don't have actual letters for it in their language. Of course, I'm like the last person on earth to talk about this, but still I think it's interesting, and I haven't made a video in a while, so. Okay, I have another example. EXO, growl. Sounds like modern / early 2000s / 90s. shifting into the R&B. Of having listened to everything I've listened to, it to me, it can tend to sound 80s, 70s right here. You know what I'm talking about. You can hear it. You can hear it. 90's. 90's. 80s-esque transition, although also kind of 90s-esque transition. You don't like hear this in a lot of modern popular music, in the US anyway. Yeah. I've been thinking about K-pop a lot, as you can tell. But somehow they make it so that it sounds nostalgic, but it keeps popping with the times so it feels fresh, you know what I mean? And that's what I mean when I say they're almost living in a different time. It's like, because of that, it's not as though they're copying anything, it's that they're making new things from a different time that has already gone by, which sounds like magic. I know music, but I don't know what I'm talking about. The string section and woodwinds sort of died out after the early 2000s, and so now when it comes back, it sounds like, oh, you remember a song because it had something like that in it. It sounds like something you'd hear in a kid's movie in the 90s, right? Like Mambo No. 5 and Stuart Little. And you know I couldn't leave out my boys. They're my boys. You know who this is.
What's poppin', girl? My name. What's wrong with you?
You hear it. It sounds like this should be in Guardians of the Galaxy. For those of you who are younger and don't know older music quite as well, it sounds 70s enough, sounds 80s enough, that it could be a song from Guardians of the Galaxy. That cowbell. You heard it. We all heard it. I've made my point. Right.